Okay, in this video, I want to cover fractions, or at least introduce fractions. And fractions are a topic which I think most people who struggle with math struggle because they struggle with fractions. And it's understandable because it's a strange concept to get used to at first, because we're used to dealing with whole numbers all the time, and then suddenly now we're dealing with like multiplying parts of numbers, multiplying and adding, subtracting, dividing parts of numbers, right? That's what a fraction is. It's a part of some whole number. And so I want to sort of help give students a better intuition as to what that means. So, for example, if I say I have like two objects, and let's just say so two objects, and let's say those objects happen to be, I don't know, candy bars. And I'm not an artist, so bear with me here. It's a terrible horizontal line there. It's only slightly better. But let's say I have two candy bars. Let's pretend these are the same candy bars, so same size and everything. So if I told you I had two candy bars, I think you wouldn't have a problem with that. You'd be like, okay, yeah, there's two of them. I have two whole candy bars, and that wouldn't be hard to imagine. But what if I said I had one and a half? Well, so what if I said, now it's like one and a half. I could write it as like 1.5 or one and one half, right? Um, I could say this because we could imagine taking a candy bar and splitting it up into two equal parts. And so imagine now this thing is split into two equal halves. If I said I have one and one half, well, that means one of these I have the entire thing. So I have two of the halves, right, making it a total of one. The other one I could say I have, just half of the other one. So the part here, so I could actually just erase that whole thing right there because it's gone. Say I ate it, right? So now I have one whole one and now a half of one. Another way of saying one and a half, though, is to say three halves. Now, why is one and a half? So I want to say that one and a half and three halves are the same thing. Why? Well, here, if we stop talking about the candy bar as a whole and start talking about it as halves, well, how many halves do I have? Well, I have one half here, I have two halves there, and I have three halves there. So I have three halves. Okay, so now let's talk about something a little stranger maybe to think of. So let's say I have, again, two candy bars here, but let's say these, for whatever reason, were broken up into different segments. So the ones above were broken in halves. But let's say I broke one of these into thirds, and when I say broke them into thirds, I mean equal thirds. Don't worry if I don't draw them perfectly equal. I couldn't do that if my life depended on it. But imagine they were equal. And let's say this other one was broken into fourths, and I ate some of one and some of the other, such that let's say I have two thirds left of this guy, and let's say I have 3/4 left of this guy. So of these two candy bars, one I broke into three equal parts, one I broke into four equal parts. I ate one of the thirds, right? So that it's not shaded in, so let's just pretend it's gone, right? I ate one of the thirds, and I ate one of the fourths from the other candy bar. I don't know why I did that, but who cares? Let's just say it happened, and I want to know. Maybe someone asked me like, how much candy bar do you have left? Well, I could report that I have, 2/3 of one and 3/4 of another. Now notice this is also something I want to point out. I said I had 2/3. I'm saying I have two, right? 1, 2. So 2 times, these parts that were broken into thirds. So 2 1/3 pieces. And so we can rewrite that as 2/3 like that. So I haven't gotten into how to do fraction multiplication yet, but basically this is the same thing. It's saying 2 times 1/3 is the same thing as saying 2/3. And then this is the same thing over here. This 3/4 is the same thing as saying I have 3 1/4 parts. So parts that were broken in, parts of a candy bar that are broken into fourths, I have 3 of them. So 3 1/4 is equal to 3/4. Okay. And so one thing we should note that, these fractions that we're dealing with is the top number. So let's look at how a fraction looks off to the side here real quick. So you have the top number, which is called the numerator, by the way, if you didn't already know that. And the bottom number is called the denominator. And it's more than just saying, oh, a fraction has a numerator and a denominator. No. The denominator means something. It's telling you this number, whatever it is telling you if you had some whole thing, how many equal parts it was broken into. So when you see a 4 here in the denominator, it's telling you of some whole, it was broken up into fourths. The numerator tells you, so I'll say right here real quick. So it tells you how many equal parts some whole thing, right? Some whole is broken into. And then what does a numerator tell you? Numerator tells you how many of those parts you have. So if you have fourths, your thing's broken into fourths, and then you have 3 of them. Well, the 3's in the numerator. The 3's telling you how many of those. So the numerator tells you how many of those parts. Tells you how many of those parts you have. So this should make sense, right? Looking at what we talked about. Here, this fraction right here was 2/3. I'm saying the denominator saying I had some whole thing. It doesn't matter what we're talking about. I mean, if you want to give it context, we can say candy bar. It could be a pizza. It could be whatever. We're saying, oh, I broke it into 3 equal parts, and I have 2 of those parts. Here I'm saying for the candy bar, I'm saying I have some candy bars broken into 4 equal parts, and I have 3 of those parts. So that's what the fraction means. But now let's talk about how we can report. I started on talking about this, and I kind of digressed here to talk about like the parts of a fraction. But if I wanted to report to someone, like someone asked me, hey, how many candy bars do you have left, or how much of a candy bar do you have left? I could say I have 2/3 of one and 3/4 of another. That's a bit, tedious or clunky to say. What if I don't want to say it like that? What if I want to report one number? So it's like, the goal here is like report the fraction, the total amount, I should say, the total amount as a single fraction, fraction. Okay, and I know that doesn't really look like fraction, but it is. Okay, so how do I do that? Well, that's going to be the topic of later videos, where we learn how to add, right? Because if I have 2/3 of one and 3/4 of the other, well, the total is 2/3 plus 3/4. I have 2/3 of one and I have 3/4 of the other. So I have a sum of 2/3 and 3/4. But I want to report this as some single fraction with some numerator. I'll put num and denominator, and I just want one number. And so like I said, I'm not going to introduce that in this video because it's too much to go over all in one video. But that's like the goal when you're doing adding of fractions or subtracting fractions. But I can't actually teach how to add or subtract without having taught multiplication first. Because in order to add or subtract fractions, you actually have to know how to multiply them beforehand. So it might seem a little backwards from what you're used to, because with whole numbers, you learn how to add and subtract and then multiply and divide. We're going to do that a little bit differently for fractions because you have to know how to multiply in order to add or subtract. So the next video is actually going to be about how to multiply fractions, which thankfully is pretty easy to do, pretty straightforward to do, I should say. So this is the goal that we're going to work towards, is being able to do that. So this is a goal that we want, is to be able to add fractions and report it as a single fraction of candy bars. And hint, if you haven't figured that out already, we have to do that by finding a common denominator. And you might only have like just some vague notion of what that means. My next few videos, hopefully I'm going to give you like a true tangible idea to grasp onto, to know what it means to get a common denominator. So those are that idea is in the next couple of videos to come. So see you in the next video, which is going to be on multiplying fractions. All right.